So another Scream film is coming out next year and I have no idea why. The audience really took to Scream, but the problem with a successful horror film that has multiple installments is that the very things that made the original unique become less special, and the fight to keep the same level of quality becomes harder and harder. So come with me as we take a walk through all 4 Scream films and look at the bits they got right, and the places where they went very, very wrong. Also bear in mind that I'm going to spoil the shit out of all of these films and tell you who the killers are, so there's your warning. The first Scream film opens in the classic genre fashion with a young girl home alone in her big house in the middle of nowhere, where she receives a phone call from a mysterious man, and as time goes on, the man becomes more and more sinister until the all-out carnage at the end. Just from the opening conversation between Casey and the killer, what's apparent, especially in this film, is that it's very theatrical. What's important is the fact that it's a movie. They have to establish the killer as someone who can terrorize their victims seemingly from a distance, before revealing that they're not as far away as initially thought, and then carrying out their evil schemes. If this were reality, no cameras, no crew, just a girl at home, the killer wouldn't go to the trouble of setting up this elaborate game because there's no one watching. Over the next few scenes, we're introduced to the main cast. Sydney is the protagonist and bears the weight of the plot's backstory. 1 year prior to the events of the first film, her mother was brutally murdered and Sydney testified against Cotton Weary, whom she saw leaving the scene of the crime. Meanwhile, she's in a relationship with brooding hunk Billy Loomis, who wants to take their relationship further, but she's hesitant about doing so. Sydney's best friend is Tatum Riley, and along with her boyfriend Stu and film buff Randy, these kids are up to date on their pop culture and horror film trivia, and use that knowledge to point the finger at each other. Elsewhere, fighting for Cotton's defense whilst killing time in between seasons of Friends, is on-the-spot reporter Gail Weathers, as well as Tatum's older brother, Deputy Dewey Riley, whose responsibility is to be as adorable as is humanly possible. Following the scenes at the school comes Sydney's first interaction with the killer. This is interesting on a number of levels because we all know how stupid horror movie characters can be, and this scene actively acknowledges the potential for stupidity and then has Sydney do something extremely stupid.
Why would you be calling from my front porch?
That's the original part.
Oh yeah? Why call your bluff?
Okay, so this stranger with a spooky voice has told you that he's calling you from outside your house and your first instinct is to go outside. Why not just hang up and call the police? You are fully aware that your mother was murdered a year ago and you're actively playing into the killer's hands. Anyway, the killer makes it clear that he means business.
Tell Tatum to hurry up, okay? Bye now.
If you hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother.
And so Sydney runs inside and locks the door, but oh shit, the killer was inside all along, or got inside through the front door that you left open. In Sydney's defense, once the killer attacks her, she does try and get out the front door before running up the stairs, but to immediately take away that defense, why didn't she go for the back door? Instead, she traps herself in her bedroom and contacts the police on her computer whilst the killer half-heartedly attempts to get to her. When it looks like the coast is clear, Billy shows up, and when his mobile phone falls out of his pocket somehow, Sydney unreasonably assumes that he's the killer. The guy was just at your bedroom door, and after a matter of seconds from the killer running away to Billy appearing at your bedroom window, he's run downstairs, gone outside, taken the costume off, and climbed up to your window. This guy works fast. Billy is arrested and questioned by the police, but then Sydney is called by the killer at Tatum's house, which throws his guilt into question for the first time. The next day, Sydney goes to school and runs into Billy, who has been released from police custody. After a brief conversation between the two, Sydney goes to the bathroom where she's torn apart by the mean girls and then attacked once again by the killer. What was the intention? Was the guy gonna kill her there and then? He didn't have a weapon, so maybe he was just trying to scare her. I don't know. Afterwards, a curfew is declared and students are sent home, but nevertheless, Stu decides to throw a party and invites Tatum and Sydney along. Later on, Sydney and Tatum discuss recent events and begin linking them to past events, namely Sydney's mother, and how she may have been a little bit more promiscuous than Sydney had believed. She then begins to doubt her own judgment about condemning Cotton Weary. When they leave, we see that the two were being watched by the killer. In broad daylight, in full costume, after it's been announced that this is the very costume worn by the killer, and the police know that. That's not the only thing. Look at this. So you're just wearing that costume in broad daylight and in a public place. Oh, forget it. Meanwhile, the whodunit plot thickens as the police discover that the phone calls to Casey and Sydney were from Sydney's dad, who's left at the start of the film on a business trip and hasn't been seen since. When Sydney was at the police station after her first interaction with the killer, Dewey tells her that he didn't check into his hotel, and now with the phone records, Sydney's dad is the prime suspect. On to the last act, which is basically the party and the bloodbath that ensues. The first major incident at the party is Tatum's death scene. She goes into the garage to get some beer, but on her way back to the house, oh shit, the door's locked, so she presses the button to open the garage door, but oh shit, the door's closing again, so she turns around and oh shit, it's the killer. This is the moment where the man in the ghost mask gets his name.
Okay, let's see. No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
The killer does not get directly addressed as Ghostface by a character until Scream 4, and I have so many points to make about that. After the killer makes his intentions known, Tatum fights back for a bit before going for the door that leads into the house, and it seriously looks like she's going to press the button for the garage door, but that doesn't end up happening. Opening the garage door would have been a sensible plan, since by the time she's bopped him with a few beer bottles and he's rolled over her somehow, then the door would have opened far enough for her to escape. But like I said, the movie didn't seem to acknowledge her obvious intentions, and so she tried to squeeze herself through the cat flap with disastrous consequences. Elsewhere, the gang of partygoers are watching Halloween, and Randy so helpfully delivers his now famous speech about the rules of surviving a horror film. Meanwhile, in a separate and soundproof part of the house, Sydney and Billy are having a chat which eventually leads to sex, and I mentioned in my Freddy vs. Jason video how much two people having sex in someone else's bed irks me, but this is slightly more forgivable since it feels more like a natural escalation rather than, we're gonna have sex now, bye! Clothes back on, it seems Billy has boned some sense into her because Sydney goes back to questioning Billy's role in all this, but moments later the killer strikes, once again clearing Billy's name as well as stabbing the shit out of him. The killer gives chase, but Sydney gets away. I just realised that I haven't been talking about Gale and Dewey as much, mostly because Gale spends most of her time being a bitch, and Dewey spends it by making people question how he ever got onto the police force. Anyway, Gale and Sydney have had their beef through the film, giving Gale support for Cotton Weary, and simultaneously discrediting Sydney's account of what happened the night her mother died, specifically seeing Cotton leaving the scene of the crime wearing a coat covered in her mother's blood that was then found in his car, which was the evidence that put him away. Gale is adamant that Cotton was framed, but Sydney is convinced that he's guilty. Gale then meets Dewey and takes a shine to him, and the feeling's mutual. They have a flirty conversation and then meet again at the party. They go for a merry jaunt in the dark before almost being run over by a group of drunk kids from the party who are going to see the body of their school principal. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned that the Fonz is in this film. Henry Winkler plays the kindly principal who's nice to Sydney and not nice to two kids who run through the hall wearing the ghost face mask. Later on, he's seeing what all the fuss is about, and then it ends badly for him. Back to the action. Dewey and Gale have a little snog, and Dewey notices Sydney's father's car and realises that trouble is brewing, and so makes a mad dash back to the house. Sydney has done the same and dashes for shelter in Gale's news van with her cameraman Kenny. They watch the footage of the killer sneaking up on Randy from the camera Gale planted in the house and realise that the delay means that the killer is long gone and is in fact right outside the van. Ooh, sorry Kenny. Sydney gets away and is basically free. A load more stuff happens. Dewey and Gale arrive and split up. Dewey searches the house and that goes about as well as you'd expect. Whilst Gale finds Kenny, drives off but is forced to swerve around Sydney. Yeah, that's right, don't check on the person involved in the crash, it's alright, just run off. Why are you going back to the house? You got away from the killer, why would you go back? Sydney finds Dewey, has another chase with the killer where she actually manages to call for help before being attacked, getting away again, where she's then confronted with both Randy and Stu who both accuse each other of being the killer, and Sydney, understandably not knowing who to trust, locks them both outside whilst also possibly locking herself in a house with the real killer. Which she totally did. So not only is Billy not stabbed by the killer, but he was the killer all along, but that doesn't make sense, but here comes the twist. Turns out Stu was in on it as well.
Surprise, Sydney.
After all that carnage, we've finally arrived at the revelation scenes. Billy and Stu have embarked on this mad rampage, killing their friends, girlfriend, and seniors, but why? Well, according to Billy, it's scarier when there's no motive, but then he gives one anyway.
How about this? Your slut mother was fucking my father. And she's the reason my mom moved out and abandoned me.
What the fuck are you looking so shocked for, Stu? You must have known all this because you were in on it. Okay, so that explains Maureen, but tell me something, fellas. What about Casey? What was your beef with her, and Steve, and Principal Himbry, and Tatum, and Kenny, and Dewey, and Randy? And why start all of this in the first place? To get to Sydney? Well, you know where she lives, so why bother with all of this? You can make the argument that they did it all to frighten Sydney, but it seems very risky, and if that was the case, then why attack her? She'd just be extra vigilant and also more accusatory, which is exactly what happened. These two are not Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees who just kill anyone they come across. They're two people with a plan. They've successfully gotten away with one murder, but now they're prompting the police with every murder that they commit. But their solution for getting themselves out of this makes sense on the surface, but when you start diving underneath, it becomes problematic. Stu drags out Sydney's father, who's been locked up in a cupboard whilst a house full of people have been partying and no one found him. Anyway, the plan is to frame Neil for the murders under the reasoning that he went crazy on the anniversary of his wife's murder, killed his daughter's friends, then himself, whilst Billy and Stu will be the only survivors, and they do a terrible job with this plan.
Guess we won't be needing this anymore.
Your fingerprints are all over that.
Oh, look at this. Ring, ring.
And that.
Need this.
Okay, so Neil killed everyone at the party, but what was his motive for killing Casey, Steve, and Principal Himbry? Don't think about it, guys. Billy and Stu are stabbing each other. Also, guys, why are you doing this in front of her? Wouldn't it be better to kill Neil and Sydney and do this last, so you're not fighting an able-bodied person who has already proved her capabilities against the killer on multiple occasions with several possibly severe stab wounds? Doesn't matter because Gail's arrived and she's got a gun, but she fucks up really bad, but this gives Sydney the opportunity to escape and then fuck up herself.
Are you alone in the house?
Bitch! You bitch! Where the fuck are you?
Not so fast. We're gonna play a little game. It's called
Guess who just called the police and reported you? Sorry, motherfucking ass!
Sydney rings the house, presumably from the mobile that Stu stuffed in her dad's pocket, and she's already taken the voice box that sounds nothing like Roger Jackson's Ghostface voice. Then the ultimate act of stupidity. Okay, so you know you've got your DNA all over that costume. That's evidence that you're wearing. One strand of hair on the inside, and you're fucked. How are you going to explain that to the police? Don't think about it, guys. Stu's back. Well, you dealt with that pretty quickly. It has been an hour and 40 minutes. It's probably time to wrap this up now, guys. You know you're getting your fingerprints as well as your DNA all over that mask. Don't think about it, guys. Randy's alive. Hooray! Oh, an hour and 41 minutes. Come on, guys. Fuck hell, thanks. So many fingerprints on that gun. And just when we thought it was all over... complete with one-liner.
Not in my movie.
Hooray, everything worked out and Dewey's alive, which is great. It may have sounded like I didn't like this film, but I actually did. It's an alright story for a slasher film, and has Wes Craven's direction, which made the film and all subsequent films entertaining to watch, which makes all the difference. And the clever part about it was that although it was over-theatrical and a bit silly at times, remember guys, it's just a movie. A very successful movie. And what happens when movies become successful? They tend to get a sequel.
Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.